Today we are happy to have our guest presenter all the way from the University College Dublin, Republic of Ireland, Professor Prospera Tedam. She is a professor of social work. She has worked at the University of Northampton and the Anglia-Ruskin University in the UK, and she was chair of the Department of Social Wellbeing at the United Arab Emirates University. Her research interests are in the areas of culturally sensitive social work, anti-oppression and anti-racism in social work, school social work, as well as decolonizing social work research, education, and practice. Prof Tedam will be sharing insight from research into the value of social work intervention in boarding schools. Specifically, this afternoon, she's presenting on the topic, Navigating Peer Violence in Boarding Schools, a Social Work Lens on Protection and Advocacy in Ghana. My name is Ernestina Tete. I am a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Social Policy Studies, and I am chairing this afternoon session. Prof Prospera Tedam, over to you. You have participants, online participants from across everywhere. We have students, we have academics, we have practitioners, and we have people that just love research online, and we are all here to listen to you. So if you are ready, you have 35 minutes to present, and then we'll spend the next 20 minutes asking questions. So over to you, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ernestina, and good afternoon, and thank you to those who have joined today. So I thought it would be a really interesting perspective to talk about peer violence in boarding schools specifically, but clearly what I'll be sharing also covers schools more broadly. And so I don't want people to go away thinking this is specific to boarding schools, but you'll see why at some point the boarding school context becomes important. So, okay, this is the first. Next slide. So I'm hopefully going to explore really briefly the complex issue of peer-to-peer violence, highlight the impact of children's well-being and safety, and of course, the educational experiences, and think about how social workers can play a pivotal role in prevention, early intervention, and advocacy within institutional settings, and then obviously offer some practical approaches to strengthen social work responses. And I think that certainly some of the people, Ernestina, some of the people I invited are from the school setting. I know there are some school proprietors here as well. So this might also be hopefully interesting for those groups. So by way of introduction, what research is telling us is that schools have actually been known to be places of security and safety for children and young people. And that environment of safety and security enables them to grow, develop, as well as gain knowledge. So I think the starting point for this conversation is, whilst we all know school to be go and learn and come back with all A's, we also know that schools do more than that. And it is within that context of the more that is done in schools that I become really interested in how we navigate these things. That said, contemporary literature and research is continuing to tell us about the varying and heightened levels and forms of violence in schools. And our concern today is about abuse of children or from children towards children. So clearly, if we're talking about child abuse from an adult to a child, that's a different legal framework. And if there are any lawyers on the forum, you might give me the specifics a bit later. But when we are talking about child on child, this is where it becomes peer, and the language is changed to peer violence. In that case, both the perpetrator and the victim are all victims. And so for me, it's this concern about how do we navigate both tensions about children being victims, the children who are perpetrating abuse towards other children, they are equally victims based on some of their own previous experiences. Now, for day children or day school children at all levels, we know that they return home. So even if they're experiencing forms of violence from their peers, they return home for that safety, that reprieve. But children in boarding schools will continue to experience it almost your 24/7. And so this is where we need to kind of be a bit more vigilant. And we have talked about bullying in the past as a construct on its own, where people have actually sought to undermine what bullying is. They've sought to minimize the impact of bullying. But actually now what research is telling us is that bullying is a form of school violence. And I think the moment you put the word violence in there, people begin to wake up and listen. Because apart from that, I have often heard it repeated that a bit of bullying doesn't really harm a child. You know, you're trying to get them on the straight and narrow. They're hard of hearing. This child is just being difficult. So a bit of bullying is okay. But once we construct it as a form of school violence, then I think people begin to listen. And certainly teachers and educational establishments should take this very seriously. So what is it? Physical, sexual, emotional, and financial abuse, or what we call coercive control, that's exercised between and among children and young people. And we'll look at some of that in a minute. You know, a young person, a child who's asked by a senior to go and buy them, I don't know, the kinky under the tree on the Sunday. The child who's, if it's a boarding child, their gari and their shito being taken. Those kind of coercive control elements, what we know now is the impact on the child's emotional and psychological well-being going forward. So when a child or a young person, so in terms of peer-on-peer abuse, this child or young person is exploited or harmed by peers. And some of them, as I say, are similar age, and sometimes, you know, there's a slight age difference. And one of the issues that we can look at, and I discussed this on Monday with the class that I was teaching in Legon, is let's really look at some of the instances where the perpetrator is older than 18, but in the same form as, let's say, a 16, 17-year-old. Does that become abusive in the context of adult versus child? Or is it because they're in the same class, same form, it should be taken as peer abuse? So I think these are things that advocacy-wise, we could start looking at and having conversations about. So the behavior, like I said earlier, is harmful to both the perpetrator, who is a child, and the victim, who is a child. And we also know that once there's always an escalation. So once a child starts off with minor infractions and calling names and, you know, what we would consider low level bullying, what we know is that once that's not addressed in a timely fashion, these things become more and more difficult. They become more and more severe. And I have an example of some Ghanaian, or at least one example of a situation in Ghana that I will share in a little bit. So we know that this, if it's not checked, it escalates. So victims are also coerced into staying silent. You know, you won't tell anybody. As soon as the head teacher finds out, or the head mistress, or the form tutor, or the house mother, you're going to be in more trouble. So how do we navigate that as professionals? How do we navigate it such that we're not putting children at further risk because they have reported? So there's a whole list here of things that can constitute peer-to-peer abuse. Now we have technological advancements, so we can include cyberbullying in that, these rude text messages, threatening text messages saying, when I next see you, you are in trouble. Or, downloading somebody's Facebook page or a young person's Instagram and circulating it with lies. So there's a whole host of things there. Of course, physical abuse, which is around hitting, kicking, shaking, biting, all of that. Sexual violence and harassment, sexting, and sexting is about sending, obviously, nude and very revealing pictures of oneself to another. And what we know, certainly in research from the UK, is that young girls in particular are at risk of this kind of abuse, where the young person may think that they're in a relationship with a peer of the same age. Let's say they're both 17-year-olds, and therefore they see it as okay to share these pictures. And then what we know now is that these pictures can be circulated and they can have tags on them that say all manner of things about the child. I think we know the prank calls and all of that. There's a growing concern about something called hazing in the UK. And the hazing type of violence really is about initiation. So people can say, in order to join our group, so let's just say we call ourselves the Funky Fives, yeah? We're the Funky Fives. And there's no, one of our members has graduated. We want another member to join our Funky Fives group. But to join that group, we give them a whole host of things that are really illegal and testing of their, and the idea is that we're testing of children's loyalty. So a child might say, you should be able to bully 3 children into crying. You should be able to seize 100 cedis from another child. You should be able to hit them across the face and run away, all manner of things. And that hazing and initiation, as we will know, is about children wanting to feel that they belong. So a child who sits there on their own all the time and is told, oh, all you need to do is go and take 100 cedis from James around the corner, and then we'll make you a member of our group, means that the children involved are initiating this kind of hazing. So it's a growing thing in the UK, and I'll be delighted to hear later from you if there's any semblance of this in Ghana. And Ahin and colleagues in 2019, and that was a while ago, told us that there's 59% of children in Ghana have experienced bullying. Now, of course, it's not as high as some countries. I think South Africa is about 65%. Some other parts of Southern Africa are generally quite higher. But Ghana was 59% in 2019. So it'll be interesting to hear whether anyone here has either done further research or is involved in research that gives us a more up-to-date picture. But regardless of what we say, 59% of children experiencing peer-on-peer abuse or violence or bullying means that we have 59% of our children at risk of developing mental ill health and associated difficulties going forward. So it's not a number to take lightly. And although I said in other countries it's higher, it's simply not one to take lightly. And I think we need to be involved in thinking about what we can do to minimize that. So there's an example here that I wanted to share, Antiri and colleagues, or Antiri on their own, give an example about what they call extreme form of bullying. And again, when we use bullying, people sometimes undermine the severity of it. So I'm going to use peer-on-peer abuse. So a senior asked me to iron his shirt. And then in the course of ironing, he said, you've made my shirt dirty. He took the iron from me, asked me to open my palm. When I did, he placed the hot iron in my palm. I still have the scar to date. And although he was dismissed, I still continue to suffer the effect. Now, depending on which side you're sitting for this conversation, we will all, I'm hoping everyone around the table today will say that was absolutely extreme. And there was no place for that in that school. So what we're hearing of that is that this child was dismissed. What we haven't heard is what was the intervention given to this child before they were dismissed or when they go to another school or whatever, such that they don't repeat this behavior. In the meantime, the parent will be told, we're dismissing your son because he bent, another child's palm or whatever, and they will say maybe in typical fashion, we're sorry, we apologize for our son, or more importantly, we'll pray for you, we are sorry. That doesn't take away what this child is describing as I still continue to experience the effects. We're talking here post-traumatic stress disorder, really bottled in a really nice way here to sound like, years later. So it feels to me that particular point does not do justice to the real outcome. The young person is still experiencing trauma as a result of what happened. And although this child, the other one was dismissed, it feels like it's not enough. So again, conversations that we can have as practitioners around this. So Bosomtree and colleagues have also found that bullying was absolutely or is absolutely rampant in Ghana. But when they interviewed teachers, the teachers didn't consider it a serious problem in relation to children's academic achievement. So they kind of put bullying to one side. Oh yeah, they get bullied there. Well, but actually they're doing okay. So the point I made above about this child living with the scars of the burn, and when I say scars metaphorically as well as physically, that actually the teachers not considering this a serious problem, for me is a problem. That means we have a whole lot of work to do with teachers about precisely how this might be done in ways that mean that children are supported. And again, this is 2010. One could argue it was, a while ago. And I look forward to having conversations with you about, what could be done or what has changed since 2010. The impact of peer violence, a whole host of things, mental health problems, including depressive symptoms. That child or the young person is at a heightened risk of self-harm and or suicide. They also have a heightened risk of being harmful in their own behaviors towards themselves, and that's the self-harm. For example, substance abuse, there's social anxiety about going into certain areas, there's self-isolation or avoiding being rejected, by other children. And of course, what we know is the learned behavior, that if the repercussions for the child who was the perpetrator isn't very strong or stringent, this other child who was the victim, quote unquote, may decide, okay, then this feels like it's okay. I can do the same. Alternatively, there could be bystanders who decide that they're looking on and are not doing anything, but nothing will happen to this child or young person. So what are the responses to peer violence, which is really where I want to come to today? A colleague of mine in Durham University, Professor Carleen Furman, she continues to write about what she's calling contextual safeguarding. I believe this is a fantastic way of looking at how we protect children proactively, rather than waiting for things to start happening and then we go, oh goodness, this has happened, how do we make it stop? So what Professor Furman is telling us is that you need to respond to child abuse or any form of childhood harm where the harm is occurring. So don't, in other words, if it's occurring in school, that is where you set up your intervention. There's no point setting up the intervention. Let's say it's happening in school. Her view is that there's no point setting up the intervention in the church. Okay, yes, the church might be able to support some way, but the intervention needs to be in the school. And actually what we need to do within those schools is ensure that the people that are working there, all of them, right from your watch person or gate man or whatever you want to call it, to the people who serve the meals, to the librarian, to people who, I don't know, look after the cars in the car park. We need to ensure that they all have an understanding of children's well-being and children's safety. So contextual safeguarding could take a whole day to explain, but I thought if I drop this in here today, perhaps people might be interested in looking it up as they wanted. Now, what can a parent do? Speaking from a parent's perspective, I think is really difficult, but you have to begin by knowing your child. And by knowing your child, I also mean knowing your child's vulnerabilities. Sometimes the difficulty we experience is that we are unable to take critique about our children. And that's because the critique often feels very personal to us. If you're talking about my child that I've raised for 15 years, then excuse me, you're not talking about my child, you're talking about my parenting. And therefore the guard is up. People are already guarded. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to, So know your child, but also ensure that you offer your child the opportunity to be safe in explaining what has happened without, if you like, the repercussions being so immediate that they stop the conversation. So know your child, increase your engagement with teachers, local authorities at all levels, and engage in supportive and empathic dialogue. That's often quite difficult. I can imagine that within the context of some of the Ghanaian cultures that we have, some of that empathetic and supportive dialogue might be a bit difficult, where you're saying, I am talking, you need to stop and listen as a child. And this brings me to yet another issue, which we don't have time to discuss today, but the changing framing of childhood. Who is a child? And who am I as a parent, and what are my responsibilities to the child, and what are the child's responsibilities in the family and as my child? So that whole context of childhood, as in terms of its construct, really needs to be looked at again and again. We need to move with the times with these definitions, because clearly technological advancements, the change in economic and social movements mean that what we knew childhood to be, or certainly what I knew childhood to be a good 40 plus 50 plus years ago, is very different today. So we have that, and I will bring the question about, are there any other points at the end when we have the open dialogue and the open discussion? So if we don't know what our children do on a daily basis, it becomes very difficult, and children can absolutely give you summarized versions of their day. Oh yeah, mom, I went to school and yeah, I had 2 classes and I'm back. I mean, I haven't seen summary as good as that. Like, it really summarizes the day. And from a child welfare practitioner's perspective, I think the question to ask then is, but tell me about the first class, or actually tell me about how you got to school. Because your child is 15 and maybe they walk or they catch the bus or whatever. So, or even if you drop them, the conversation should start from, from the point they got into school, who they hang out with that day, what the teachers said, what they learned, and it's that daily experience. And again, we know that the modern family that we have means that these can be absolutely difficult for parents to have, because you're as busy as anything when you come back from work, and you probably haven't got the time to listen to the child tell you all about their day. But this just kind of reminds us that these things are important. And if we create these safe spaces for children to disclose anything that's happening, then it's fine. There's something certainly that I think we need to look at as a community. that sometimes when a child, or even sometimes your friend, when your friend is telling you something about another friend, and it's serious, I often hear in people's responses what I feel is very, it can come across as defensive on behalf of that person. Oh, Jane, oh, no, Jane is not like that. Now, the moment we go in with Jane is not like that, or your son, daughter tries to tell you about an issue in school, but they mention the parents who they mention the child and the child's parents. Oh, no son of Kwabna will be behaving like that. So what you're saying is that my son is lying. Okay, great. If you've got experience of your child making things up, I guess that's different. I'm just trying to bring here some of the other ways in which practitioners and/or professionals can enter this space and have those conversations. So that open communication is absolutely important. Reinforcing kindness, the value of kindness, reinforcing the fact that, emotional intelligence is important, getting the child to explain what happened, but also take responsibility. Okay, mom, yes, James hit me. Okay, he shouldn't have hit me, but I took his biscuit and I ran away. So therein lies an invitation for a conversation about the child. Why did you take his biscuit and run? Didn't I give you biscuits in the morning, etc., etc.? And then you have those conversations. Social interactions and monitoring them can get even more difficult in this day of IT and technological advancements, where the child used to come and knock on your door and say, can I play with AC? And your son has gone or your daughter has gone out to play with AC. It was very easy. If AC is not back at 5 o'clock, you go knocking. Oh, did AC pass by today? And so on and so forth. However, we don't know who they're interacting with online. And believe you me, children are very good at circumventing some of the parental controls we put on the Wi-Fi. They're very good at it. In fact, they know it before you do. If I log on to this website, mom or dad will see because they've put this. So they find another friend who perhaps can navigate it easily, or the friend comes to the house, puts on your Wi-Fi and helps your child look at stuff they shouldn't look at. So monitoring social interactions become a bit difficult. And of course, collaborating with schools as a parent, recognizing that you're not going to shout at the teachers. Teachers for the best part of it are doing a fantastic job. They don't need extra pressure from parents, but at least what we can do is have those open conversations with them so that they know that we can formulate a strategy together to make things better. So more recently, there's this concept now of, it's always been there, the bystander effect. All of us know what that is. Everyone thinks the other person will do it, so they walk away, or you just think it's not my business, I'm walking away. But more recently, we as child welfare professionals are promoting what we're calling upstander. So, somebody, a child or young person who directly or indirectly confronts the bullying behavior. Now, what you don't want is to end up with two victims, right? But at least the child who is viewing it is not passive watching and walks away. So that even when the headmaster says, James, you were there, tell us what happened. Oh, no, I didn't see anything, sir. Because James is also afraid that if they confess to have seen something, the bullying starts with them as well. So what we're doing is trying to promote upstander values. And how do we do that? By ensuring that children understand the value of being honest, the value of looking out for your neighbor, the value that keeping every child safe in this environment or keeping my friends safe in this environment also means that I will be safe in this environment. Because believe it or not, those bullies, those people engaged in the peer-on-peer violence, will find another person, and it might be you. So, the upstander responses or the upstander values are really around supporting young people to value the input of not just being passive bystanders, but actually doing something about it or reporting it. And then there's a few more there. I think that, schools really, if I'm a school proprietor person, I'll do some evaluations, occasional evaluations of my school, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. You can do some evaluations, look at how children are safe, look at which children are sharing issues, look at what you are doing as a school, what needs to change, and so on. So I think it's really important so that students' well-being and academic effort is maintained. And of course, what we also know is that the bystanders sometimes go away feeling quite bad because, Is it true that Kwabna's face was bleeding? Oh, I was passing when they were, pushing him, but I didn't do anything, and now the poor boy has had to go to hospital. So what we know about, the trauma is also the trauma of witnessing abuse that I've done nothing to help. So all of this really, in my mind, links into what we need to be doing as practitioners. In comes how social work can advocate for safer learning environments and safer social environments, because we know schools are both educational and social, and how social workers can do things about it. And some of this, I'm not talking to people who don't know anything. You all know all of this, so I won't go too much into it, but it's really thinking about assess your school's violence problem. One child complaining about peer violence is one child too many. And the reason we need to be concerned about that is, like I say, that there are grades of this violence. And that's why sometimes people undermine the impact of bullying. But if we have a zero tolerance policy towards all forms of abuse within our school and learning environments, what we are saying is we're bringing someone to assess the school's violence, have a note, have a register, and register how many of these reports are coming in every day, every week. What kind of abuse is it? What did we do about it? What did the child say about it? What did the perpetrator say, etc., etc., etc.? And then we have a bit of a sense of what this looks like in our particular school, whether it's a boarding environment or a day or both. So work with, individual children, and groups of children to understand dynamics. We know that group work as a social work intervention works really well, where you get a group of children sitting down to answer particular questions and to talk. It's very therapeutic. And, so when we have more time, maybe I can come back another time and talk you through that. But group work is absolutely brilliant for groups of children. We have to liaise with children, all the children and the families involved. Like I said at the start, all the children, whether they're the perpetrators in this case or the victims, they are all still victims because they're all under 18. And that's the golden thread for us, that we're talking about children who by the United Nations definition is a child or a young person who has not yet reached their 18th birthday. So in that case, we can also decide that we will implement prevention, all kinds of awareness raising, and really lots of intervention programs. If you see that maybe children who arrive really early, this is just an example. Let's say your school opens at 8 o'clock, but there's some children there at 7. There's a lot of risk there. Especially if at 7, the school, quote unquote, hasn't officially started, therefore there's no real supervision. So maybe what you do is you institute a rule that says, even though it's an open school, blah, 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 you can drop children early. Children must not be there unsupervised until 7:45. What that does is the parent perhaps will wait, or the parent decides that, okay, in that case, I will drop the child a bit later because the school is really not going to take responsibility for children dropping early. Now, again, I'm probably talking from a very different perspective because of where I work, but I will welcome a conversation about how that impacts or whether that feels viable in, in this kind of context. So, so social workers in schools, yes, I've repeated this. I don't want to repeat it all. Peer relationships are important. Anticipate common questions. Oh, but last week so-and-so did this and nothing happened. Why is it happening to me this week? Rehearse your responses. And these are things that I would do with my social work students who are going out to schools to work. I would tell them about the group work that I said to you earlier. You really have got to, as a professional, whether it's a teacher who's responsible for child protection, you've got to maintain composure. You've got to think about staying calm, active listening, pausing and reflect, maintaining eye contact. So this was some of the group work issues that we talk to our students about when they're about to go into schools to either work or to do their practicum. And the role for education institutions or establishments, really, one is about, policies. I've seen a few. I did a random check for a few just to see, or just to get a sense of what they looked like. Some are either not, in my mind, some are either not strong enough because they don't define what these things are. They assume universal knowledge. Bullying will not be tolerated. Okay, what is bullying? It just assumes that everyone reading it understands what bullying is or understands the acts that constitute bullying. And if the anti-bullying strategy is not working, maybe we use the word violence. Maybe that's when people will start to listen and sit up. So we have to have clear definition for these anti-bullying, anti-violence strategies. We have to have a clear procedure for reporting. When it happens, you first tell your class teacher, then they report it to this, then they report it to that. You go to a social worker or a teacher who's trained in maybe guidance and counseling, whatever, and you make a note of it. And there's a designated person to follow up. So that's really important. Promoting a positive school culture, I'm sure, that needs no rehearsing here. All staff and students have to be trained about the same thing. And I always say this, like, if you're thinking about a whole, but you train one half, you're missing the point, because what happens to this half that haven't had that training, or at least a summarized version of this training here? What happens is that the teachers go out and say, oh, now if you hit another child, it's this. And the children are saying, when did that happen? We didn't know. So once all these, as a whole, a holistic approach, once this side of the school or the establishment have sorted out what they need to do, the children need to be told and the parents need to be involved. And of course, the early intervention and the staff training, those kind of points don't need me to elaborate. But these are really important to think about these conflicts. Sometimes the conflicts between young people that result in the peer abuse is a little issue that started last week. And it festered and festered and festered. Nobody knew it was happening. Nobody could resolve it. And before you see, it's blown up into something of a huge proportion and causing some difficulties to people. Okay. So on the left here on your screen is a book that myself and a colleague in Legon wrote a few years ago, looking specifically at child protection in boarding schools. But that's one thing I wanted to kind of just mention. And the book has some practical approaches there. But I wanted to draw your attention to something that we call the Keeping Children Safe in Education, done by the UK government. Every year, it'll be updated. So if you go back, you'll see 24, 23, all the way back. And what this does is this tells schools and establishments and colleges how to maintain safe and violence-free environments for their children. Now, because technology goes so fast, if between 2025 and 2025, a new phenomenon arises, these guys will update. They will update. Right. And so I think it's something that we need to look at. Like, I don't know, and you are the professionals, you might tell me we have one for Ghana, but when I looked, what we had was a student code of conduct written by GES about how students should behave. But I'm talking about how we can keep children safe in the environment. So it kind of shifts if you like, it kind of shifts who is responsible for doing what. Yes, children should be responsible for making sure to behave in certain ways, but there has to be a big responsibility also on us. Okay, I'm heading towards the end now. Oh, I am actually conscious of the time as well. So whenever I talk about setting up child protection systems in schools, and people say to me, oh, but we have guidance and counseling, but then you mentioned specifically, oh, no, they don't deal with that. So it feels to me there's a gap there, and Estina and colleagues might look at this gap, what actually the role is. It may not be it may not be a qualified social worker. It may be a teacher with additional training, which we have in the UK. It could be the guidance and counseling person with that additional training. What I do know is that some of the guidance and counseling staff that we have in Ghana are not qualified. When I say qualified, I mean they're not trained in guidance and counseling. I was told earlier this week, I knew that because I've spoken to a few people, but I was also told that sometimes the school chaplain or the pastor doubles up as the guidance and counseling. And we all know when you bring a religious view into it, it's very important for our culture. But does that answer the questions that we will have after this? So I think we need to think about who our students are. And it's really important when we're doing any kind of child protection system, and for us as advocates, thinking about who is in our school. Is it an all-boys school, all-girls school? Is it mixed? It's so important because, as we know, child protection and or abuse is gendered. We know that women will experience, or girls will experience, different forms of abuse, in addition to the mainstream ones, than boys, for example, and boys will also be at risk of other things. So just to conclude by saying really that, and I started off with this, schools are not only centers of learning, but obviously spaces where we have to recognize that we need to develop and encourage care, dignity, and protection. And we will do that as practitioners, and we will hopefully support others to do that as well. So I've got a few references on here, and Anisina, I'm very happy for, I'll send the presentation, but I'm very happy for people to have my professional contact as well, so that if they need to contact me about anything or want me to signpost them to any research, then I'm happy to do that. How am I for time?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prospera Prof Tedam, for keeping to time. You did very well with time. You saved me some 3 minutes, and I'm very excited about that. So that means we have more time to interact, that people have time to ask questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very insightful. And for me, the part that excites me, or the part that interests me, is the seeing both perpetrators and victims as victims. Because as a parent of a child who was dismissed from a school for cyberbullying, I'm not sure that she was considered as a victim. She was treated as a perpetrator, and there was no support. And then, except for the line that they write in the dismissal letter that a parent should seek psychological help for the child to find out why the child did what she did. And when I pushed to say, dismissal is too harsh for a child who came to confess, because for that you could not find out who did what, so you didn't even reward that. And they said, well, and it's not even in your sanctions, your code of conduct, because maybe you hadn't considered cyberbullying at the time that you were writing the code of conduct. So I think that dismissal was a bit harsh. And I was told that, yes, we had engaged our lawyers, and in fact, they had likened cyberbullying to a crime. Well, I wasn't told whether it was petty burglary or armed robbery or murder, but they just said it was a crime. And so she wasn't just a bully in this instance, she was also a criminal. And that was just how she was treated, in addition to her parents. So it's very important. This presentation is very close to home for me, especially seeing the perpetrator as a victim, because she's a child, 14, 15 at the time. And how she was treated. And I dare say that I'm not sure even the victims had adequate support. And this is even the best of schools, because it's a very elite school. And I'm not sure the victims even had adequate support, let alone talk about the perpetrator victim. So the victim, I'm not sure how much support was available, let alone the perpetrator victim. So this is very interesting, and this calls for a lot of attention. And then it's very also easy to move towards the victim when we talk about responses. And I know that the time doesn't do you justice to unpack the responses for the victim and the perpetrator victim. But thank you so much for giving us a lot to think about in respect to this. The things you said about school social work, the absence of school social work, guidance and counseling, the pastor doubling as the counselor. I mean, these are all issues that we really need to think more closely about. So thank you. And thank you for sparing us some time to discuss this. So I will open the floor for questions and reactions and comments from our participants. We have quite a good number of participants online. Thank you all so much for joining. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Director for Center for Social Policy Studies, Professor Naneku Anidoho, who is online. Thank you, Prof, for hosting and for joining us on this for this presentation. If you have a comment or a question, kindly put up your hand, use the reaction button, and then I will call you for a question. Please keep your questions very brief, under 1 minute, so that we can have Prospera answer our questions. I will start with Nanama. I can see Nanama Mensah on my screen. Nanama, I'm a very accurate timekeeper. I will mute you if you go beyond 1 minute. So please, I will take a set of 4 questions, and then we will let the presenter answer. Thank you so much. Nanama.
Thank you, Doc. Hello, Doc. Thank you. And thank you, Prof Tedam, for that wonderful presentation. One, my question would be for persons within education, what do we do when the community culture influences the school culture? So you have a situation where the school is situated in a place whereby most of those who come there are within the community, and they have so much influence on the community. And most of the time, they fester some of these violence and riots and all that. So that is the first thing. Then the second thing, per experience with some of our schools, you realize that old boys are kind of backing, especially when they are out. So there are school competitions and all that. And then you have some of these coming to back them, support them. And most of the time you realize that sports related routes, most of the time started by these old boys who want to show that yes, we are there. And most of the time they've started a long time ago. So that would be my second. And then where does state institutions or agencies come in? So where it moves beyond bullying and it goes to say hooliganism and then routes and they are spoiling school infrastructure and all that. Where do we bring in the issue of the police? We've had issue where we brought in DOSU and all that. So how does the school authorities handle some of these things? Thank you.
Thank you, Nanama. Okay, so Prof. Naneti Anidoho. Yeah. Prof, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Professor Tedam. I'm always intrigued about this idea of the historicity of childhood, the idea that childhood is constructed over time. And because we tend to assume that the way that we think about children now and the period of childhood is how it's always been. We know that there was a time in the past in our cultures and others where children were thought of as adults, mini adults, or the time of childhood was very constricted. By 13, you were an adult. So I was very intrigued to hear your suggestion that we should be thinking and researching about what childhood looks like now in Ghana, in our contemporary context. And since you spend more time and thought on this than I have, I wondered if you had some pointers, some ideas, or some observations about how childhood in our context might be changing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. Equia Adobuedu.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I have two questions. The first question I'll ask from the perspective of a parent. So if you're a parent and your child below 10, comes and complains that he or she is being bullied by an adult in their school, what's your line of action? And so this is an adult you have a good rapport with, you trust, and you believe was perhaps trying to correct or discipline your child. So how do you approach that? Do you directly deal with the adult, or you go through the school? And what do you say to your child as well? The second question I wanted to ask was perhaps broader, not just to the presenter, but if as a school you would like your staff to be trained more on how to handle bullying and peer violence, where do we go to in Accra or in Ghana? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Equia. So, Prof Tedam, please, we have 3 questions. We don't have any more hands up. Would you want to address them?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question, which I think was around schools. Children in schools come from the local communities, if that was my understanding. And how do you, if you like, extrapolate or divide that when it comes to the school in itself is a community, isn't it? And I think that's the starting point. And you're absolutely right. Yes, the school physically belongs to a particular part of town. We also know that, in terms of social learning theory and all the theories that we know about, how children learn and grow and develop their behaviors and mannerisms, that they learn that from the community. So you're either in a school that understands that the community has a big role to play. Therefore, the policies, the engagement must be with your communities as well. It is absolutely okay to say to communities that, a child coming home, or some kind of sensitization or advocacy work, a child coming home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and tired and who has homework, yes, they might be able to help cook dinner, but really and truly, can you give them an hour to do their homework? I don't think you can remove one from the other. I think what we need to do is advocate and work with our communities to ensure that the transferring of those responsibilities, that actually is quite an important thing for children. The point about riots and stuff, actually, there's a lot of research around that, where people have a set, I'm going to say a set list of alumni. That's the only way I can put it, where they rule out all what they will call, they'll call hooligans. So school A complex has 10, 15 old boys, let's say old boys, and we invite them to, they turn up at things. What we do is we start with a tick box. If they come the first time, it's 3 or 2 strikes and they're out. The school needs to devise that. And if it's a GES school, GES needs to get behind the school. If you turn up to support your child or somebody at a sports event or something and you are rowdy, 1 tick. If you do it 2 ticks. 3, you are no longer welcome. I think we need to, and we do this as we need to model the behaviors that we want to see in our children today and beyond. So in terms of more wider school issues, I would say the school needs to deal with it, and GES, with a list of people who are uninvited. If you behave like this, you will be uninvited to future programs. We even have stories of people going to parent-teacher associations and getting up to exchange blows across. I mean, what is that? And we're here to talk about, some of that. So I think those are the sorts of things that might help. So circling back to your question, I think that you can't remove the school from the community, but what you can do is involve the community to see the kind of school you want to develop, to see the kind of children you want to have. And it's not going to be easy. It's not an overnight thing. It's probably not even a 10-year thing, but it's a longer term plan. And a social worker will help you do that, whether you believe this or not. A social worker will help you with that community engagement, because certainly in the UK, the social worker is the link between the school and the home. So the social worker also does home visits to the family to see where they live, to hear what they get on with, and to be able to help them if they need help and support. So I hope I've answered that question. I hope I heard it right. It was a bit muffled earlier, but I'm hoping I've got that right. Okay. Prof Anido, thank you so much for joining. I am, oh gosh, yeah, I'm intrigued that you've managed to join. Thank you. So you ask a really difficult question. What is childhood in the Ghanaian context? And I think, given that almost everybody is now a lawyer or has some legal training, I think we will obviously begin with what the legal definition kind of tells us. That's always a helpful point. So if the legal definition is still telling us that a child is, somebody who has not yet reached their 18th birthday, we also know as social scientists that, sometimes it's not just about the chronological age, but it's also about ability and competence. And sometimes children, particularly children with special needs or additional needs, may not necessarily meet that criteria if we always go with the age-related, if you see what I mean, because some children will be potentially developmentally delayed and so on. So I would say, what does Ghana do about it? Ghana should look at a cross-section of children today. And I'm saying all of this quite tentatively because we've already been told that after COVID, that years down the line from COVID, we're going to see a very different type of young adult, because as children, they spend a lot of time managing COVID. So I think that is yet to come. It hasn't hit yet. But I think we need to look at, apart from the chronological age, we also need to look at some of the sociological implications of what we did then and what we're doing now. I know there's so many places that as a child, that you jump onto the trotro and go and come. You're 10, 11, yeah, go on trotro, go and buy this, come back. Now 11-year-old, we're looking for a car for them. We're looking for Uber because actually they will refuse to sit in that trotro if they can help it. So we're looking at a child who is also experiencing a very different socioeconomic setting. And for them, therefore, they might be seen to be developing faster. So if we go with the legal age for a child, I think that's a good starting point. And then we do need literature that brings us up to date to today, what does a child in 2025 in Ghana look like? How is that defined? And then we also need to look at, in a few years to come, when we have them as young adults and those who experience COVID, what are the differences there? Because I think what we are finding is children of this particular, yes, AI and all of that. People are not wanting to learn. People want to just cut and paste. People are always on their phones. That's all great. But it also means that they're learning a lot faster. But are they learning the right things? Are they developing in the way that we would want? So I'm quite happy. If anyone is game, we can look at how we look at, childhood. Certainly in England, we have additional factors that will kind of impact how we look at childhood. We will look at all the diversity, we'll look at race, ethnicity, all of that as well to kind of determine what we're thinking. But I hope that's a useful kind of, those are my initial thoughts, that we start with the legal kind of who is a child, and then we build in the sociological and economic concerns much later. And then I'm moving to the a 10-year-old bullied by an adult. It's not bullying anymore. That's abuse. That's abuse. That's violence and abuse. And I think you're concerned, the person who said was saying something like, oh, but maybe it was discipline, or I know the person. And that's what I started off by saying, that we are very quick to say, oh no, Jane is not like that. And therefore, what do we do to the child? We don't want the child years later to experience anything. So I would have, because you're friends with the person, if you weren't friends, I would say go through the normal channels, report it to whoever, the principal, headmaster, whatever, headmistress. But if you're friends, you might want to have that aside conversation about, oh, James complained about this. What is your take? Now, my understanding is that in 2017, GES and the government passed a law about no corporal punishment in schools. But as recently as last year, somebody did a study looking specifically in one of the areas in Northern region where the teacher said, oh, no, we've never heard about this. So, there's a mismatch between what the government thinks they're doing, and unless a whole bunch of teachers in the research were pretending, there's a whole mismatch between what the teachers think they know versus what the government has told them not to do. So it said, no, we didn't know that it was illegal to not discipline, it was illegal to, what's the word, to discipline children harshly. We didn't know that. And the law is there. So, and then they said, but how else does the government want us to manage these children? That's one part of the argument. Then the colleagues I was talking with on Monday said, well, actually, what then happened is some other child, some school, parents just stood or teachers just stood and watched as there was violence because they said we're not allowed to intervene. I think they're different things. And without trying to sound, condescending, that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out to say, oh, because there's a law of no physical chastisement of children, I stood and watched for this child to be stabbed. That is a cop-out. That is a cop-out. But then, have we offered the relevant kind of, you're not allowed to do this, here are the things you can do. But when it becomes illegal and somebody brings out a knife, I'm sure I'm looking for the police number. But then again, the question, will the police respond? Will the security respond? And so on and so forth. So I hope I've answered that question. Between a child and an adult, especially a teacher, it is abuse. And then I think that's...
So she had that question. I had another question about, which it was general, was not
okay, not for me, because I think, yes.
But if you have any comments on that, you could just offer a comment. Then I'll allow Robert Intifo has his hand up.
Okay.
We'll allow for one more question and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. So coming in new to this and not really knowing the system, I would just imagine that your school has a school council. Sometimes the delay in referring things to the council to agree, or the PTA you would call it, and then move it on. Some of the times those processes are so bureaucratic that they don't work, because by the time things are done, it's 3 years down the line, the child has even finished the school. So I think if we're looking at where do we take these things, I think GES most definitely needs to be involved. If you have an association of private schools or independent schools or whatever you want to call them, you need that association. But what you almost need a referral mechanism that says, when this happens, ring here. And if they assess and there's nothing, no further action, go back. More action, this or that. You really do need a chart that flows into where you will get the support. I know some NGOs have been here and back trying to do these things, and I don't know whether it will work. So I think, Ernestina, this is your bag. I will leave it with my colleagues here or anyone who can respond to that more appropriately. But that would be my thought, that there's a proper action point in terms of when this happens, you refer on. It takes 3 days. We need to come back to you, because in the UK, you have to meet the timelines. It cannot drag on forever because the child remains at risk while you are taking forever to make a determination.
Right. Thank you very much. The child remains at risk. As UNICEF will say, the child can't wait. So if we don't spend all that time doing,
Brilliant.
Robert. Hello, Robert. Robert Intifo. All right. Okay, so we seem to have lost Robert, and I do not have any more hands up. I would like to say a very big thank you to Prospera. Okay, you seem like Robert wants to talk. Yes, Robert.
Yes, good. Thanks, Madam, for such a wonderful opportunity. Let me commend Prof for such an insightful presentation. Yes, mine has to do with situations where these bullying occur at the blind side of school authorities, and instances where victims are coerced to remain silent, and as a result, not even reporting it. How do we manage such a situation? Because more often than not, there are such instances, even when they go home, they don't even tell their parents.
Yeah.
And it goes a long way to create, a problem for such victims in the future. So how do we manage it? Because once it's done at the blind side of school authorities, students, victims too, are not reporting, and the students themselves are not reporting. How do we, I don't know, but how do we manage such a situation? Because students are suffering in silence a lot.
Yeah. So certainly this is,
Prof,
thank you for,
can I please take a question?
you take the other one. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Hello, Patrick.
Yes, Patrick is on the line.
Yes, Patrick, please go ahead with your question. That will be our last question for the day.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the host and the presenters. I was a bit behind, so I don't know if I'll be off the line, but following what has happened so far from the time I joined, I want to find out if there's any national body or some of you who are championing some of these education are putting some kind of measures or pressure on the Ministry of Education to look at how issues of stealing and bullying in the secondary schools could be nationally discussed and addressed. Because if your child is in any of these schools, I bet you go through a lot of heartbreak. I have my son in one of the schools recently, and on our parent platform, of course, previously, the previous government has banned PTA. I learned today that the government has reintroduced it. But if you look at the report, the consistent bullying and stealing, it is something that, as a nation, if we don't find a way to address it, then our education is going to be meaningless. Because how can we train
Hello,
children who are
Patrick.
coming up
Hello,
and
Patrick.
that?
Hi,
Yeah, so
Patrick.
in landing, yes.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that what can we do? Is there any championing processes so that we can all add voices and bring this to a national forefront? Thank you very much.
Thank you too, Patrick. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Sorry to keep you for another couple of minutes and I shall be done. So the first question was around what happens when something is done to the blind side of even the school authorities, forget parents. this is where the whole school approach is needed. Now, in some of the schools that I have engaged with in the UK, and I know it's different, and I'm not trying to make the comparison here, there are CCTVs everywhere, CCTV cameras and what have you, they're everywhere. So really, and even on the playground, there are playground, whatever they call them, monitors and things like that. So that's easily picked up, even if the child doesn't want to report it. I propose then for a situation like Ghana, I propose a whole school approach. What that means, I would say, is that the whole school get together and rally around a set of rules that they all agree with. There's no point some of your teachers thinking that this is additional work. I'm just here to teach. What's this additional work? And I have to look after this and that. There's no point that happening and you going away thinking it's going to work. So the whole school needs to be involved in looking at this. And we need to be able to read children. And I think this is where the specialism or professionalism comes in. The people who are trained can read a child, whether the child is generally quiet or just quiet for a particular day or moving and trying to avoid other children. So there are some professionals who can pick that up. So maybe some of that forms part of some of the broader training or continuous professional development that we can have, but it has to be a whole school approach. It cannot be the principal and the deputy and that's it. So I hope that kind of works with the blind side. Now, the child who doesn't want to talk to you at home, like I said earlier, we need to create those environments. Those environments are about us. And of course, a child is worried that when they tell you, you will go and escalate it and then they get into more trouble. So how do you reassure the child that there's a policy and I'm going to follow it? That means that they won't even know that and try and find ways of getting there. So I hope that kind of helps us think about it. I wanted to say I knew nothing about the second question, which is really about the national body and things like that. But I think, you just need a few concerned people like yourselves for that advocacy. Mm-hmm. You need a few people like you, what you've just said, a child who's stealing now, we're worried about that person in public office or any kind of office in the future if it's not curbed now and stopped. So there are repercussions going forward in life. So I think what we need to do is be really clear that even if five people are interested, they can start a lobby group within the school, within a region, within an area, and gradually bring these to the attention of ministers and others who are willing to listen. More importantly, call some of your researchers from Legon, the CSPS, and say, are you happy to come and do like a case study research for our school or group of schools? So we have the data. We have the data, that's the evidence, and it will inform the practice that we put in. So that would be how I answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you for the questions to those who asked questions. So Prof Prospera Tedam, we want to thank you so much for the insightful presentation. As I said, you have given us a lot to think about, and definitely, like the last questioner said, there needs to be a national level conversation on this because there's a lot going on that we are not paying attention to. We also thank you so much for highlighting the role of the social worker. In 2000, when I enrolled as a bachelor, level 200 student in social work, most of my colleagues and I didn't know what we were going to do with social work. I dare say that so many years after, maybe 25 years later, students of social work still don't know what they're going to do. But considering the number of schools, even just in the GES system, if we're going to place social workers, train social workers in all of these schools, that's a lot of work for us, so that students shouldn't be wondering what to do with their social work degree. So thank you so much for highlighting this and then giving us a lot to think about. We are really grateful. I want to thank our distinguished participants for joining us and staying throughout and for asking questions and contributing to the richness of this presentation. Prof, people want to know where they can get your book. Is that possible? And do you still have some in stock? And is there a place people can? Yeah.
I left them for the very quick time with Prof Afrani.
Okay, at CSPS.
Yes, at CSPS.
Okay. All right.
So I think they can get it from him there, and then when he's moving on, we can have a conversation about where else he is.
All right. And Prof also left her email address, so you can contact her directly for copies if you are not able to contact us at CSPS. Once again, thank you all so very much, and see you in 2 weeks' time for another enriching conversation.
Next week, actually. Next week we'll have
next week. Yes. So we have another next week. Yes,
we have Bernard Avler talking to us about how we can make sure that our policy recommendations and our research is accessible to the media, so it can have wider reaching impact. So I'm excited about that. And
Oh,
I
I
hope
might join that from
here.
Dublin. Yeah, thank you. That's important.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for the reminder.
Thank you,
Prof, we want to
everyone.
see all
Yeah.
60 of you next week. Please tell a friend to tell a friend. It's going to be interesting. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of
Thank
your
you,
day.
everyone. Have a good
Thank
one.
you.